Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure tonight to be joined by Sar Ahmadiel, who is from the community living down in Dimona. You're currently in Dimona, correct?
Yes.
I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about yourselves and about yourself as well and the community. So please go ahead and enlighten us.
All right. We appreciate the opportunity for being here with you and the audience. Again, I'm Sar Ahmadiel. I'm the Minister of Information and a national spokesperson for the African Hebrew Israelites here, the African or the Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem, as we call ourselves. We are, well, let me say this: in the media, we're often called Black Hebrews. We've never, ever referred to ourselves as Black Hebrews. We're Hebrew Israelites. And sometimes because we spend a lot of time in the southern portion of the continent, further south of here into the African continent, we do use the distinction African Hebrew Israelites in that context. But let me first give all honor and praises to the Holy One of Israel, to His anointed, to all those that are in search of truth, justice, peace, mercy, love, and in this case, information about who we are. I greet you this evening, shalom. And again, it's our great pleasure that we appreciate your invitation and appreciate this opportunity to impart what we can in this session.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I wanted to touch on that issue in the media, that you guys have never called yourselves Black Hebrews, even though that name is something that is synonymous with the community in Israel. You know, I knew about you guys growing up, and it was always referred to, unfortunately, as Black Hebrews and not as African Hebrew Israelites.
Right.
So can you tell us what do you think has happened there, and what's the disconnect that the media has from the reality?
Well, we arrived in Israel as an entity. We arrived here in 1969, and maybe I'll talk a little bit later about the history. But we had come full circle because we do trace our roots back to this land. Back to the dispersion and exile after the year 70 at the hands of the Romans. But returning back in 1969, the country really wasn't prepared to receive community of African people, Black people from America, which had been our exile, our reality. And it was a recipe for conflict, in the sense that here we were coming out of America and what the 1960s represented for us in America. You'd have to know that we didn't like or trust white people. And here in Israel, Israelis had no experience with Black people. And so the media simply related it as was a popular adjective in those days. The Black, and we were Hebrews. We didn't identify as Jews. We never did. Jewish in the religious sense of the term. And so that particular name stuck. But let's be honest, in the Hebrew, in the Hebraic language media, Kushim ha'ivrim, and the connotation that goes with Kushi, you know, is a negative one. It, you know, I got into a little conflict in the last several years with some rabbis who had used the terminology and were caught, and they tried to put a positive spin on it as if it had to refer with the Kush of the Bible. And everyone knows you can't be an Israeli and living in the Israeli contemporary society and not know that when you say Kushi, that's not a positive connotation. But nevertheless,
Sure.
that was still the language that was used for a long time, and still in some circles, it's still that's still what people remember and recall. But we refer Ivrim Yisraelim, Hebrew Israelites. Again, we're not. If someone was to ask us if we are Jewish, and if we only had a couple of seconds or one word, we would say yes. But the reality is that we're not Jewish in the context of being adherents to the religious tenets of Judaism, but we are Jewish in the sense that we identify through the tribal lineage of Judah. And also because we live actually literally in southern Judea. So that would also make us Judeans. So that is the preferable context in which we use that terminology.
I see. And was that so?
We're
Was the choice
spiritual,
of
not religious?
I see. And was the choice of Dimona then part of that? Since it is in southern Judea, you thought that was the right place to be. Is there a connection there, or how did you guys end up in Dimona?
That actually was providential on our part. We had no direct role in where we were initially settled. On our arrival in 1969, we were initially welcomed, even though the country didn't really know what to do with us or how to deal with us. But the representative at the airport with the Ministry of Absorption, they had us originally in some area in the central part of the country, and the woman came in and scratched the name out and wrote Dimona. And we didn't really have an idea like that, but later we came to find out that we thought it quite providential, and it was the perfect place for us to be, both in the sense that this is our ancestral home, and in the sense that Dimona was the ideal incubator for the idea and the seeds of the ideas that we have brought to Israel.
I see. That's fascinating. It's a really, really fascinating story, and I'm sure there's plenty more that we're going to get into. One thing that has always fascinated me about the community and benefits today, and almost half of Tel Aviv now is following the vegan lifestyle. I wanted to ask, where did the veganism come from, and is it funny now to see it as a trend? In modern life. It's suddenly taken off and become a worldwide phenomenon almost.
It is very exciting to see it. It's very liberating in the sense that it vindicates positions that we took that were not popular 50 plus years ago. Because since our arrival in Israel, we have been vegan. The transition was being made in the couple of years prior when we were in Liberia. And again, I can walk back through that history. But ever since we arrived here, we have been vegan. That was a foundational tenet of our culture and lifestyle. And we did it because we came full circle, and we went back to the Breshit, the Genesis, first chapter, 29th verse idea that is very, very clearly spelled out in that book, in that reference, that our diet was plant-based. And in the beginning, when you talk about the media again, we were known widespread. We were always referred to as a vegan polygamous cult. So 50 years later, indeed, to see that not only has that been vindicated by Israel standing now amongst the nations as maybe the preeminent vegan nation in terms of percentages and popularity, but to know that they had to drop that terminology when applying to us. And so if people realize that, they say, well, you all have been vegans for 50 years. And then they would have to think for a moment and say, well, what other good things might you all be doing down there in Dimona that we too need to check up on? Because there's a lot of things that veganism is just one pillar in the numerous pillars of our culture and lifestyle that we feel all make as much sense as does veganism. And so it was the fact that we operated a vegan restaurant in Tel Aviv for 35 years, the fact that we were the first to produce tofu here in Israel, and still the fact that we have a factory that produces lines of two actually that produce lines of vegan foods that are great for those who are making that transition and making it palatable and acceptable for them. The fact that our children, upon graduation from high school for the last 20 plus years now, have been going into the IDF, a 100% IDF induction rate, and what they bring in terms of every unit they go to, and the knowledge and the examples that they're conveying. We know we would like to take credit for the vegan explosion. So we're very happy to see it, and certainly it's a vindication for us that it was something that we knew, because in the beginning we were teased about it. You know, even our own family and friends were teasing us about it. But nowadays, you know, people understand the wisdom and the intelligence behind that move.
Yeah, I mean, I completely get that. As somebody who follows a vegetarian diet, it's not quite vegan yet, but I'm a vegetarian, and I switched from meat to you know, I ate meat until I was around 25 years old, 26 years old, until I decided to take a turn and try something different. And I felt my body, you know, I felt everything, you know, running a lot smoother. I felt a lot healthier. And I did also get a backlash from a lot of people, you know, that love the meat and love the steak and love the chicken and love the, which I was kind of shocked by, you know, like it's my personal choice what I eat and what I put into my body. Like, you don't really need to worry about it, you know. So I do think that that's great that you guys really paved the way here in Israel, and obviously we're seeing an explosion here, and the amount of vegan options that are available in, you know, every city is amazing now. You know, you can really find great food. So you did mention that was one of the pillars of the community. What are some of the other pillars that you guys lean on and that you embrace for a healthier and better lifestyle, let's say?
Well, another would be, let's stay in the arena of those that are beneficial for our health. Although the beginning of the vegan was a decision because it was rooted in what the creator, as we were interpreting it, wanted for us. And so that was the fundamental impetus. But like you said, the health benefits that we ourselves could testify of confirm that, yes, this makes sense and this is something else we should do. So in that arena also we have where every 3 days a week, where it's mandatory for every individual in the community to get out and do some form of physical exercise. We know that, especially in the era of social media and the influx of gadgets and what have you, that we don't move enough, and life is movement. And so we make it mandatory that everyone has to get involved. If they're self-starters, then they're okay. You might need a partner, you might need a team, you might need a group, you might need a class. So there's Zumba, there's Pilates, there's dance, there's basketball, there's softball, there's we have a full complement of weights and exercise things and those kind of programs. And so walking in the mountains, running in the mountains, it varies for biking. You know, we have people who ride their bikes to Yerukum and even maybe beyond. So that's all part of that lifestyle. Our spiritual leader is Ben Ami, is our spiritual leader, whose picture you see over my shoulder here.
I can see
he is the one who laid the foundation for the community's cultural practices, and not that not that others haven't contributed to that, but he definitely laid the foundation for these ideas. While most of our family in the larger Israeli community are feasting on the Sabbath day because we are Sabbath observant, Although we're not religious, that's another issue we'll have to deal with. We do observe the Sabbath, but while the rest of the family is feasting, we're actually fasting. So from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, we're fasting. All of those who are 8 and above, we are doing a complete fast, with the exception of the times when during the summer daylight savings times when you're allowed to drink a little juice in the middle of the day. And even if at any time you're allowed to drink a little water, and even if you're feeling faint, we're not torturing someone. We're not trying to cause someone to fall out. If they feel like they need a little something, then eat a banana. But you can't go in and cook a 7-course meal. And so fasting is an element of our weekly schedule. And the fast assists the body in ridding itself of toxins. But of course, it is also allowing your inner organs to rest as well. So it's a day of rest. The Sabbath day is a day of rest for us. And so that ties us in. And it ties us also to the land. If we are created from the minerals of the soil, which is literally in the Hebrew what it's saying, afar me adamah, not dust of the earth. Dust is a nuisance, but minerals, you understand, have value. Minerals that's a little different way to look at that idea. Indeed, we have every mineral that you'll find in the earth, you will find it present in our bodies. And so that ties us to the land. And if the land has a Shemitah, and of course Israel is currently in a Shemitah year, then if the land was instructed to rest, if we were instructed to allow the land to rest, then we should be able to rest as well, to keep us in harmony with that. And so by fasting 1 day a week over the course of 7 years, that's the equivalent of 1 year, because obviously we couldn't fast for the entire year. But it keeps us in that cycle of 7. We have what we call no salt days every other day here for us, starting Yom Rishon, Shlishis, Tamashis, is a no salt day, meaning we don't add salt to our food. And that was to correct the taste buds or the acquired taste that we've gotten from for salt from processed foods. Most processed foods are laced with salt and sugar, which is another of our dietary guidelines, where we restrict the intake of sugar. We have sugarless weeks, we have sugarless days, and most of us in the community now, we don't consume sugar at all. We'll use maple syrup, we'll use at least honey, stevia, the herb. So it was to move away, in the book of Job, Job asked the question, he says, is there iniquity in my tongue? And indeed there is, because again, these are acquired tastes for salt and sugar and even tobacco and alcohol. These are all acquired, because you remember your first puff on a cigarette. I'm assuming that maybe you tried it, in your adolescence. You remember the first swig of alcohol. And the body's first initial response was to reject that. And so we've made every effort to create what in certain circles, in public health circles, is called an enabling environment, where you can't go to our store and buy any of these items that are harmful. You could go to our store blindfolded and it would meet with these criteria. We also, hey, Shalom, babe. One of my sons is coming back from Milloween.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Where was he posted? Yeah. Oh, you don't want to say that. Don't worry.
He was up north this time. He's usually down here. He deals with tanks, mechanics.
Oh, wow. Nice. Nice. He's a mechanic. Very nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So nice. Another is that our spiritual leader made it mandatory that every month, once a month, that every adult needs to get a full body massage. Now, of course, when we tell our visitors that, everyone's ready to sign up, So,
yeah, sure.
But it's an acknowledgement of the great stress that the modern life puts us under, and the fact that stress is a killer. And so when you combine all of these different aspects of our attentiveness to health, it does lead to some consequences, and they're good consequences. We're even careful about what we wear. The clothing that we wear must be a pure fabric, a natural fabric. We don't wear polyesters. It must be either cotton, silk, wool, or flax linen. And the reason for that is very simple, and it actually is biblical at its root, because Moses instructed that we were not to wear mixed fabrics or mixed garments. And of course, they didn't have polyesters in the days of Moses, but modern science has determined that there's a different frequency, a vibration, a resonance in different fabrics, and they would clash, and therefore they might throw you, because we are vibratory beings. We are operating at frequencies, and that could have caused a problem. And it was something that Moses was well aware of in those days. And so we understand that polyester doesn't allow your skin, which is your body's largest organ, to breathe. So when you sweat, which is a natural function, and your sweat contains toxins, the body's pushing out poisons, and they sit there because polyester won't soak it up. The cotton will soak it up, and you can throw it in the wash and cycle it out. But the polyester traps the toxins in between the fabric and the skin, and then the skin actually will reabsorb those toxins back into you. And then you'll look up 10, 15, 20, 35, 40 years later and want to know, well, where did this come from? Where did this disease, where did this dis-ease, where did this tumor, cancerous situation, where did it come from? And so it's an accumulation of things. And so all this is part of our lifestyle. And so we're very careful. I need not say we don't smoke and don't drink hard alcohol. We do make some homemade wines for special occasions, but no one is to drink for the purpose of getting drunk. So it's all part of a holistic environment. So those are all the dietary and health related things. But there are other in our social order. We practice what we call all Kol Davar Bishutaf, all things in common. And so it's simply an economic order of sharing. It's very much like the older model kibbutzim. We put into the pot collectively, take out according to our need. And it ensures that there's no vast disparity in standards of living amongst different members of the community. Sharing and enough are two words that Ben-Ami made clear that had to become part of our vocabulary again. That there's plenty to go around on the planet if we only learned how to share, and that we developed a mindset where we said, I've got enough. It doesn't make sense, no matter what your income level is, if you can afford a big mansion with 10 bedrooms and you've only got 2 children, that's not intelligent. It's not intelligent, to have motor vehicles, which are great inventions, great tools, great, they offer great convenience and mobility, but it's not intelligent to be sitting on Ayalon Freeway, at 4 hours a day, and you're looking around and 90% of the vehicles are all just occupied by one person. That's not an intelligent use of a vehicle. So all that is part of the social order that we've developed here. So organic agriculture, our system of education, which is based on teaching life principles, life preservation principles, not necessarily dissecting frogs and so forth. This is something that from our foundation that we were blessed really to have the time again in this incubator of Dimona to plant the seeds of a different direction for all of those different aspects of life. And we've mastered, we like to say that we've mastered the art of living, and that we can teach these principles now. And it's actually connected to our early years here, the first 25 plus years here, which were extremely difficult in the sense that we didn't have status. We were slated for deportation. We were fighting literally against the Ministry of Interior and fighting to stay in the land. No work permits, no access to health care, no access to schooling. And so all of those hardships actually forced us to develop all of the different pillars that I'm, explaining to you now. And so we realized that we would not have done that had we been able to go to the hospital. When you get sick here, you go to the Beit Kolim, house of what? Sickness or illness. Our medical facility is called a Beit Kaim. And we named it that because we rarely get sick. And the most that happens there is that that's where our babies are born. So it's a birthing center. We've had more than 1,150 babies born there. And so we've been able to then take and synthesize these great blessings. And then now again, that we are able to move into the IDF and move into the larger society, and that we don't have that stigma of a cult attached to us. Now we're able to share these great blessings with the rest of our family here. So like Joseph, who was sold into captivity by his brethren, it was written in Tanakh that his brethren may have meant it for evil, but the Creator meant it for good. And so we understand that. And so therefore we have no animosity. We realize that was all just simply part of a divine plan.
I see. And that it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see how far you've come and the amount of integration into society. I think people are clear. When you guys first came, you had no help from the country. It's not like Olim Acherim, other people that came from Ethiopia or from Morocco or from Yemen or from government help. They have funds, they have access to healthcare, they have a time period of integration into the country, and ulpan to learn the language. You guys had to do all that completely by yourselves without any help.
Yeah, that's true. Again, we arrived in '69, the first group, although there was one who was here for about a year prior, but that first group arrived and they did not have the benefit of being in an olam. Let me plug my phone in. We didn't have that benefit, and again, no work permits. It was difficult. However, when we arrived, that first group was initially received because, again, they didn't know what to do with us. We were offered the opportunity to convert, but on principle, we refused because, like I said, on principle, we felt that would be to deny what we said we were. And that was more important to us in the eyes of the Creator than to please man and the Ministry of Interior or the Ministry of whoever, Jewish affairs, whatever it is, the rabbinate, in terms of this identification. And so the first of arrivals were actually on that kind of course and were receiving those kind of benefits. But within 9 months of our arrival, the law of return was rewritten. And it was rewritten in such a way that defined us on the outside. Now, what was the motivating factor for that new definition? We can only speculate that maybe we had something to do with that as well. But nevertheless, the law was made retroactive even in our case. And so that was what began the hardship. But we didn't sit on our, we weren't discouraged. We remembered that when Joshua was entering into the promised land, that the people were instructed to fear not and be not discouraged. And so there were lots of things that we encountered that were frightening to us and that would have been discouraging to us. But our instructions coming in were, don't be afraid and don't be discouraged. And so we stuck it out, and we're glad we did. That was part of the again, the divine plan, and we feel that again, we're being vindicated by the consequences, by the results that you can see 50 years later.
For sure. One thing that I was very interested in hearing about, you touched on it a little bit earlier. There was a time in Liberia before you made it out to Israel, before you came to Dimona. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Let me start again here in the year 70 at the hands of the Romans, because the global impression of where Israel, where Judeans were dispersed, seems in many cases, even internally, to be limited to that we ended up in Europe. And logically, if you have a dominant military power, and in the case we're talking about the Romans, if they're coming from the north, which way would people logically flee? To beat a retreat. And it doesn't, you didn't have to be an aloof in the IDF to understand that your retreat would be south, especially given the long history of interaction and presence in Egypt, in Ethiopia. Egypt and Ethiopia are mentioned 1,500 times in the Tanakh. So
100%.
logically, many of us, a significant number of us, went south. And so when you look at the migration patterns of many of the Israelites and Judeans, if you look at different ethnic groups scattered all over Africa, many of them have oral narratives, because we couldn't carry scrolls with us. We couldn't carry artifacts. All we had was an oral tradition. And so when you look at the migration sagas of many of the ethnic groups, such as the Lemba down in southern Africa, when you look at the Bassa in Cameroon, when you look at the Ashanti and the Ewe and the Ga in Ghana, when you look at the Igbo and Yoruba in Nigeria, many of these people have what we call Hebrew isms, and they are cultural similarities to the biblical Israelites: circumcision on the 8th day, linguistic connection, parallels, separation of the women during their menstrual cycle and after childbirth, straight out of Mosaic law. And so many of the peoples over the course of centuries ended up in West Africa. And it was in West Africa that there was a well-established trade with Portuguese and the Danes and the what do we call the Netherlands?
The Dutch.
The Dutch, thank you. The Dutch. And so you have that history, and then you have that transformation of the trade into the slave trade. And so we know that Europeans did not enter into West Africa and carry away millions of the people. We know that it was local traders, other indigenous African peoples who went and captured other peoples. They wouldn't have sold their own people into captivity. They sold these newcomers who were bringing these new ideas, who were bothersome, who were using up their resources, eating up their food, trying to marry their daughters. You can imagine the tension that existed. And so it makes sense that those newcomers would have been those that would have been rounded up and captured and sold into captivity going into the West. And so that being a hypothesis, when you look in the West and you begin to pick up that thread, when we got off those ships in America, my ancestors are among those that came on those ships to the Western Hemisphere. And so you pick those same threads up in the sense that, for example, in North America, we were forbidden to read, write, preach, or teach, punishable by death in many instances, but we kept alive our culture and memory via song. Our songs were known as spirituals. We didn't sing about the river Niger or the river Congo, the river Volta. We sang about the river Jordan. We didn't sing about Mali or Songhai or Timbuktu. We sang about Jericho and Jerusalem and Canaan's land, places here. And so there was this idea that, well, that came from European missionaries. I used to think that kind of would make sense. That was an answer, but it's not the correct answer. Why? Because when a Scottish explorer named Mungo Park first went into West Africa in 1799, he encounters in the Mandinkas, amongst the Mandingos, Mandinka people, where Sierra Leone and Liberia is today, he encounters a brother, a school teacher named Fantuma, who has in his possession the first 5 books of the Bible, Pentateuch. He has a book of Isaiah. He has a book of Psalms. They're in Arabic, but they're biblical texts. They're in Arabic because that's the language of scholarship in West Africa at the time. Now, this Mandinka is giving out stories of Moses and David and Solomon as part of his own folklore. And when he finds out that this Scottish explorer knows the same stories, he's like, how do you know my folklore? How do you know my stories? And so our first exposure to the Bible, our first exposure to that identity was not via European Christian missionaries. It was already part and parcel of our culture. And so up to 60% of the enslaved Africans that arrived in the port of Charleston, South Carolina, are known to have been Igbo. I don't know if you recently heard of the ordeal of Rudy Rockman and two of his comrades from here. Right, they were in jail, just simply trying to document the story of the Igbo and the connections of the Igbo back to here. And so this is that same thread of cultural continuity that took us into the Americas. And so fast forward to post-slavery era, after the Emancipation Proclamation, fast forward to 1900, you had Black preachers who were teaching that the African in America was actually descendants of the lost sheep of Israel, lost tribe of Israel. And so our spiritual leader, again, was part of, first of all, he was born into a family where his parents taught him that he was an Israelite. And he was part of a community, a Black Hebrew community. There I go, Black Hebrew, right? A Hebrew Israelite community in Chicago. And he would ask, in the early 60s, he would ask his teachers, his elders, well, when do we go back to Israel? Because, of course, the state of Israel had been reestablished and so forth. So he's saying, so when do we go back? And the elders would always say, it's not time. We're waiting for this. We're waiting for that. And it did not rest with him. And so laying on his bed in meditation, in prayer, he's visited by the angel Gabriel, who instructs him in what he says was about a 45-second vision that he will lead the Exodus, and the Exodus would take place in the following year. Now, following those 45 seconds, he said it took about 3 weeks for him to get his nerve up, because first of all, he thought the angel may have gotten the wrong address, that he's afraid to share the idea because he's afraid of being ridiculed and laughed at. But when he gets up his nerve and he does that, he's pleasantly surprised that he's assisted in that endeavor. People begin to say, yes, we should return the same way that we came here. And of course, we knew we came from West Africa. So the next question was, well, where in West Africa? Someone else said, there's Liberia. Liberia was established by and for former African enslaved peoples. And so 2 brothers were sent to go and visit and check it out. And yes, indeed, in Liberia's constitution, it required that they open their doors and receive us. And so within 2 months, 350 people from the confines of Chicago, the Chicago area, were packed and on their way to Liberia. by 1967, in keeping with
Wow.
the vision that Ben-Ami had received in 1966. So Liberia was the place that we chose and we felt was destined for us as our wilderness experience. It was our place to unlearn and unpack all of the negative things that we had acquired as an enslaved people. And it was necessary to cleanse us in preparation for our return back to the promised land, back to Israel. And so we felt that we had 3.5 years outer perimeter of time of 3.5 years in which to accomplish that. I said there were 350, right, that actually made the journey into the wilderness. Well,
from Chicago to
from
Liberia,
Chicago,
yeah.
Big city Chicago, we were not just any riffraff. We were not just people who were down on our luck and disenchanted. You're talking about teachers. You're talking about a Chicago police officer. You're talking about a Chicago bus driver. That was a good job in those days. Ben-Ami himself was a foundry worker. He was a metallurgist. He actually was in the laboratory making sure that the steel was of the proper combinations and so forth. So those who made that journey, they sold homes, they sold cars, they went into the interior of Liberia. They didn't stay in the capital city. They went into the interior, cleared land, lived in tents, braved poisonous snakes, driver ants. We dug wells. We tell our children, don't play down by the wells. And children being children, playing by the well, little Kanina falls in. The children are afraid to come back and tell us until it was too late. So these were some of the hardships that we endured. Malaria, dysentery, not knowing how to grow food. We thought food grew on the shelf of the local supermarket. So when the little monies ran out, we literally were starving until we were humbled to the point of realizing and being taught by the locals, oh, you can eat this and you can eat that and you can raise this and this is good for food and this is good for this medicine and so forth. So that was all part of that humbling experience that we went through in Liberia. Now, out of that 350, Amir, we ended up being 138 that made the journey from Liberia to here. The rest of them went back to America. A handful perished. A few of our elders and little Kanina passed away in Liberia, but
I'm sorry to hear that.
the remainder of them was all part of a price that we again felt we had to pay. And because remember now our whole outlook on why the galut, why the exile had to occur was about disobedience. And so we saw where we had to reconcile ourselves back again with one another and with the Creator in order to gain his favor again in that return. So the 138 that made it, the remainder basically went back, and we have no animosity towards them. It was too difficult. It was just too difficult. Now let me back up a moment and show you how again we feel that Providence was working with us and was with us every step of the way. In 1966, Ben-Ami had that vision. 1967, we actually leave and we're in Liberia. 67, 68, we're struggling in Liberia. We're enduring rainfall, monsoon rain, and the tents are dry rotted and the mud and the 68. April the 3rd, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King is in Memphis, Tennessee. And Dr. King is one of many of the individuals, and the groups that the FBI is monitoring because they were very fearful of something. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, literally wrote in a memo to prevent the rise of a black Messiah. Now, Messiah is a Hebraic term. He didn't say black Christ. He didn't say a charismatic leader. He said a black Messiah. And in our view, the messianic personage was destined to lead the people back to the promised land. Now, so Dr. King, many people talk of his I Have a Dream speech, which was done in 1963, in which he talked about a life in America, black and white children playing together and so forth. But by 1968, 5 years later, Dr. King's vision and idea was radically changing. He came out against the Vietnam War and was being ostracized for sticking his nose into white America's business. And he told a friend of his, a dear friend, saw him and he knew he was troubled. He said, "What's wrong, Dr. King?" And King said, "I can't help but think that we're integrating into a burning house." So obviously his mindset was shifting, the focus was shifting. And again, remember, the FBI is monitoring and watching. And so that night, April the 3rd, King is disillusioned and he's supposed to speak at a big church in Memphis. And that night was tornado warnings out and rains and floods and so forth. And King stays at the hotel. He doesn't want to come out. When his aide gets to the church, he senses another spirit, and he calls back to the motel and says, "Dr. King, these people need to hear you." He reluctantly gets out of his bed, comes and makes what is his last public address. And at the last closing moments of that address is when he says that I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. The next morning, coming out of his motel room on the balcony, he's assassinated, April the 4th. We're in Liberia. We've got transistor radios, which some of your listeners may not even know what a transistor radio is.
They might not have a clue.
Right. And so we hear about his assassination. We hear about the riots that erupted following. But it was months. There was no CNN live up to the minute coverage. No one knew for months what he said the night before. But the next month, May of 1968, we leave Liberia and come, Ben-Ami and one other brother leave Liberia and come to Israel. And again, by 1969, the remainder of the group comes because Ben-Ami left that one brother here. He didn't know he was going to have to stay here. He went back to the airport, Lode Airport, and thought he was returning back to his family in Liberia too. But Ben-Ami told him, said, "No, your job is to stay here, learn the language, get into a kibbutz, learn the system, befriend someone in the Ministry of Absorption, and prepare the way for when we come after you." And so we would say all of that is certainly not coincidental. It was all providential. And so we feel that is the only way that we've been able to endure all these 53 plus years outside of America to be successful in what our objective is. And our objective, if I can just close out with this comment, our objective is to really live up to the mandate that biblical Israel was commissioned. We were to be a light unto the nations. And I know that this is a term, this is a phrase that's often used, and I know that BB and others have interpreted it as technological prowess, as military might, as high-tech startups, the startup nation, etc. We don't quite see technology in that light. We don't see that as being our major contribution to the world. We don't see that being the future salvation for humanity. We would rather say that it is our morality, that it is our sensibility. It is something much more practical in terms of, again, diet, lifestyle, education, agricultural methods, etc. That practical spirituality made practical and applied in a daily sense, that is what we are called to project unto the other nations. So we take that role very seriously, and that's our commitment. That's our commitment to our fellow brethren here in this land, in this great land. That is our commitment to the rest of our brethren in the Edenic lands, in the African lands, and that is our commitment to all of humanity, because it was through Abraham's seed that all of the nations were to be blessed. How would that process take place? So that's that circle that led us back here, and that answers that question. And I know many is, well, how do you connect to Israel? That is that circle.
I think it's absolutely fascinating, and there's so many questions I want to ask, but I don't think we have quite enough time to get through all those different things. But I'll try and pinpoint a few to try and wrap your brain, because I'm amazed by the whole story. And I didn't even think about Martin Luther King and the movement, and the same kind of frame as Liberia, and then the movement to Israel. I didn't connect all those dots, and it makes so much more sense now that I hear it from you. And obviously you go back and you think about how things were in America, back in the 50s and the early 60s, and for the hippie love Woodstock generation, and that kind of vibe. So we all know the horrors of slavery in the States, and the amount of discrimination that went on there. With regards to being a light among to the nations, which is what you just spoke about, which is something that I connect to very much so as well. But unfortunately, today in modern day Israel, I think maybe we're losing our grip on it, because unfortunately we do see many societal issues, whether that's within the family, whether those are environmental issues, or whether that is the conflict with our Palestinian cousins.
Sure.
All these things, they don't really equate with me and being a light among the nations. I get frustrated with Israelis that say Israel is the best country in the world. I mean, I would love to say that one day. I would love to. At the moment, it's not the best country in the world. It could get a lot better. So what I'm trying to is, what do you think that your community has to offer the wider population here, and what can be learned from you guys? And how can we apply it in our day-to-day? Because I think there is a lacking of spirituality going on here in the Holy Land, to be honest.
Excellent question, our brother. I think it goes back to the root of the fact that, again, we're not religious. We actually see religion as the problem, not just here in Israel, but all over the world. That religion, if you look at many of the conflicts around the world, at root is the fighting of something that we should be in common with. And 100%. So obviously there's something greatly flawed about our religious principles. And so here in Israel, you've got these two extremes of radical fundamentalist Islam and the radical Jewish, and neither of those extremes can tolerate and will tolerate the coexistence of the other. And there's plenty of room for all of us. We could all live in relative peace and harmony. There's room for us to live together, coexist together, if we only could mitigate those extremists on both sides. So spirituality is not just, religion gives you a day of worship. and you might put in a few hours or whatever, but it's not something that overarchingly governs every behavior. You can't tell me you're Jewish or you're Christian or you're Muslim, and then I can find some measure of comfort with that. I don't know I don't know what that means. But when you're spiritually led, when spirituality and a relationship with the Creator, when a relationship with the earth, when a relationship with the creation, you mentioned environmental, we have to live in harmony with the environment. We cannot be in opposition and clash with it. The dominion that was given to humanity in the Bereshit, the dominion didn't mean to dominate. It was more to be a husband. It was to care for. It was to live in harmony with and teach the principles by which we could coexist. This is what we're witnessing. We're witnessing an intelligent creation fighting back. That's what global climate change and warming is. It's a rejection of the earth. It's a rebellion of the earth. An intelligent species of animals and fauna and flora are rebelling against humanity that's out of cycle. And we won't win unless we get back into that harmony. And so the teaching priests, we were to teach people how to live in harmony. There's a cycle that we must attain and live in accordance with. So all of these things matter where the Creator's concerned. So spirituality will govern your agricultural methods. Spirituality will govern what you put on your plate at night. Spirituality will govern what you teach your children. We can't talk about higher education and we're teaching how to put together smart bombs and intelligent weapons of destruction. That those are oxymorons. That doesn't make sense. And so you can't be an economist and see a world system wherein 50 people have as much wealth as the bottom 50% of people on the planet. That's not just wrong. That's not just disparate. That's downright evil and obscene. And it is unsustainable. It's unsustainable. So yes, the political situation that we live in Israel is unsustainable. We know that. We agree with you on that. Those people. The global economic system, the environmental chaos it's all unsustainable. So what we need is a radical change, and we see that Israel is the perfect place, and it's the biblically prophesied place from which that transformation is to take place. If we can solve our problems here, then everybody else won't have an excuse. And
Domino effect.
They are our cousins. They are our brethren. And so if we could get back to the fact, and I always like to ask people, what is it that made Abraham the first Hebrew? And some people will say he's the first Jew, but that really doesn't make sense, because that was his grandson, Judah. That he was the first Jew. But what made Abraham the first Hebrew? Because if it was about genetics, if it was about DNA, if it was about bloodlines, then wouldn't we be talking about trying to find a Chaldean ancestry? And so at the end of the day, it's not about this. It's not about the bloodline. It's not about the definition that the rabbinate has come up with for who then is entitled to live here and who is entitled to make aliyah according to the law of return. I had to have a talk with one of my sons when he went into the IDF, and he was talking about wanting to be part of Magav, and he actually said, I want to go and take down some Arabs. And I realized, I said, hold on, slow down. Where did you get that from? Well, I know where it comes from. I know that the larger society conditions us, and prepares us for that kind of a conflict. But we can't look at all Arabs as our enemies, because they're not. We're surrounded by you know, in the midst of Israeli society, there's this Ashkenazic Mizrahic rift, and it's so disheartening to see that many times when you have those in the protests who are shouting death to Arabs, they're actually ethnically Arabs. They're from Morocco, they're from Algeria, they're from Tunisia, they're from Yemen. They're ethnically Arab. So where did that come from? And at the end of the day, dear brother, we have to acknowledge that we're all only doing what we've been taught. So obviously there has to be a new teaching, a new message, and the conditions of a people cannot change until the message changes, you know. And so that's what we represent here. We are deeply committed and involved with the peace process here, but we know that peace is not something that you can't have an agreement between the parties that are fighting, and then the next week you find out that they were promised billions and billions of dollars worth of military armaments as part of the deal. That simply, you don't quell an argument between two friends fighting and you take his stick and give him a pistol, you know, and give the other one a bazooka. That's not a peacemaker. And so they're very basic kind of things that we have to go back to and understand that there can be no peace. You know, in the Hebrew tongue, everyone knows shalom is peace. But shalom comes from shalem, wholeness, oneness, perfection. And shalem comes from shlemut. And shlemut is integrity, you know, that basic fundamental understanding between people that you and I can come to an agreement and we can trust one another. But if there's no integrity present, you'll never get to the peace. And so those are the fundamental kind of things that we have to teach, and we have to teach them. We have to get out there. And so again, going back to one of the earlier statements this evening, that if the larger Israeli society can understand the wisdom and the intelligence of the vegan diet and see that it is mandated by the Creator from the first chapter of the instruction manual that we were given, then yes, there are some other things that we from Dimona can share. We are peacemakers. We didn't get mad. We didn't get violent when we were mistreated for almost 30 years here, 3 decades. We sat down and we were able to come to the table and reason and rationalize a way forward and suffer some things on the way, to be patient, which is, again, in the Hebrew thought, lisvol, to suffer, to bear a burden, to carry a load. So we're okay with that. And some people have to do that. And so Judah had a role, Israel's got a role. Those who claim to be of the seed of Abraham, which encompasses all of us, we have to build those kind of bridges one by one. But we're not discouraged, we're not dismayed, because we understand that before we can get the million, you got to have hundreds of thousands. You got to have tens of thousands before that. You got to have thousands. You got to have tens and hundreds. But what's the most important number? Most important number is the one. And so if we can, at that level, we got to pick up the pace. I'm not going to say there's, you know, we don't need to be picking up the pace, but the one has to be out there moving and teaching and being that example. And we can turn this around and we can reach what they call a tipping point a lot faster than you might think humanly possible. But we're on the right track. We're in the right place. This is certainly the right time, because if not now, when? Because we're at the door looking at the extinction of the human family. The earth, don't worry about the earth. The earth is going to be okay. The animals are going to be okay. They are intelligent. You know, it's wayward man that's out of cycle and that has to return back to the proper calibrations with one another and with the Creator and with the creation. Selah.
Brilliant. That was absolutely really inspiring, Sal. I must say, very inspiring, and it you know, this is just a thought, but how about we get all the leaders? You know, we get the leaders of the Israeli government, we get Hamas, we get the PA, we get the Islamic Jihad, we get all these tyrants, we get all of them. We bring them down to Dimona. We leave them there with you guys. We lock them in a room. You guys take care of them for a few weeks, and hopefully they, you know, you can come up with something that might, you know, work in the long run here. Because I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired. You know, I'm only 32 years of age. 33, sorry, I've even forgotten how old I am. Just had a birthday. I'm 33. So, you know, I've already been through cycles of violence and war, and it's the same over and over again. And I know that if we don't do that recalibration, we're doing the same thing over and over again, hitting ourselves, and it's not going anywhere. So I really appreciate you sitting this conversation, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's been a really inspiring and very educational conversation for me. I learned so much about your community that I had no idea about. I'm sure there's many more things that I wanted to get into with. Like, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Tel Aviv and you know, the holiness of the site over there and stuff like that. But maybe we'll leave that for another episode. We can kind of leave the more nitty gritty stuff for another time, if that's okay with you.
It is. If you just allow me to say one word about a particular case that is something we're dealing with now. The fact that we have 51 of our members who are facing deportation. They are under threat of deportation. We have a court case. At least we're gearing up for a court case. We're still awaiting the final disposition of the Ministry of Interior's appeal process. But we, you know, it's a complicated story. It's very complicated. It goes back 20 years, and it goes back to the original agreement that we received from the government that allowed us to move into permanent residency and citizenship. And there were some who fell through the cracks. And so now 20 years later, they're being asked to leave, and we're fighting it. We're not going to take it without a fight. And so we want the larger public to know. And on that note, yourself and any other one listening, anytime that you want to come down here to the end of the world and make that left, as they say, anytime you're on your way to Eilat or on your way back from Eilat, feel free to stop by and visit us here in Dimona. We feel we would welcome you, and we would love to share more about what we're doing and what we've accomplished, and get a chance to meet you.
That would be great. That would be absolutely amazing, Sar. And I definitely want to bring it to the public attention that there are 51 members of your community who are currently, like you said, basically that have fallen through the cracks and that could be deported. We will stand with you here on the Open Peace podcast against that. Of course, we're against any type of kicking anyone out of their homes and changing of lifestyles and that kind of stuff. It's something that we don't condone. And I really hope that, you know, the ministry comes to its senses and does what's right and let them stay in their home, you know.
And we'll look to try to arrange for that idea of bringing all those leaders down here. The first thing we're going to do is feed them vegan food for a week, which was one of the big complaints. I understand that up there in Glasgow at the summit, you know, they said what you know, they fed them the usual fare, and it's a primary fundamental element in the global warming scenario, that if we changed our diets, we would actually solve the problem. So they missed an opportunity there, but we'll make sure that anyone that comes to visit us and we start working, they're going to have to eat vegan.
Yalla. Yeah, I'm all for that kind of changing of lifestyle. I'm all up for. I really have seen the even though I'm not fully vegan, I'm vegetarian, but I have seen the benefits. You know, definitely.
Yeah, super.
So
Well,
again, thank you very much, Sal, for coming on, and I'll definitely try and stop by at some point. Next time I'm in the South, I'll try and stop by and say hello and meet some of the community. It'd be fantastic.
So we look forward to it. Hallelujah. You got my number, and we expect to hear from you.
Sure thing. Sure thing. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for staying tuned. Leave likes, comments down below if you have any questions for Sar. You know, please don't be shy. And I've also left a website to the community's website at the bottom of the description. So if you guys want to find out more, please go ahead and check out the description. Thank you, and Laila Tov, Shavua Tov likulam,
Toda.
Bye bye.
Toda. Laila Tov.
Bekef.
Shalom, shalom.